We are back, folks. 8:06 on a Tuesday morning here on the Michigan Insider on Sports Talk 1050 WTKA. Online at WTKA.com. Sam Webb and Ira Weintraub on the other side of the glass. And last week, big news came down. It was a topic of much discussion. And Ira, it was one of the few times where there just wasn't a lot of I'd say, opposition. There wasn't a lot of negative opinion. Most people seem to be of like mind and in celebration of the new Michigan radio broadcast team. And one of those members is a holdover, although he's going into a new role in that booth. And I'm talking about Jim Brandstatter, Michigan's new play-by-play man. Jim, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Well, so Brandstatter.
There wasn't much negative, huh?
No.
I didn't. Usually there's always negative. Usually there's some people out there that think it's a dumb idea. Hopefully that's not going to happen this year.
Well, on our show, you always find some opposition to anything. But in this particular instance, Brandy, it just wasn't as pronounced because I think people are really appreciative of the opportunity to hear, two guys that are obviously friends, two guys that have worn a uniform, and two guys that exude the passion about Michigan that all the listeners happen to have about it as well.
Well, I appreciate that, and that's the hope. The other thing I think that is important is both of us have been broadcasting for 30 years or more. Mm-hmm. You got 60 years experience in that booth. Dan, obviously, with Monday Night Football and CBS on television, but his passion obviously is Michigan football because he doesn't need to do this,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he is a guy that's pretty well comfortable, and but he wants to come back to Michigan. He wants to be in Ann Arbor on football Saturdays, and that to me speaks volumes, about his passion and what he brings to the table.
All right, so Brandy, kind of give me the genesis of the idea for you to slide over a chair. Was that something that you said, hey, I'm interested in doing this, that they approached you with that? How did that come up?
Yeah, they approached me with that, but it wasn't until into January, truly. They were. I was all last season when Frank had announced that he was going to retire. I just made sure, I told Dave Brandon, I said, Dave, I'd like to stay with the broadcast and my current capacity as the color announcer. And Dave said, no problem. We're going to go out there. We'll find a play-by-play guy. And I said, great. And they went out and they wanted to look for a guy. The key thing and the key component was they wanted a guy that I think had a Michigan background. They didn't want just some generic announcer coming in and broadcasting football games. They wanted a guy who had a connection.
Mm-hmm.
And they felt that they weren't able to really get where they wanted to go. They had a bunch of good candidates, guys that could do the job real easily, but it just wasn't the fit that they wanted. So they asked me in late January, I said, can you do play-by-play? And I said, yeah, I've done it before.
Mm-hmm.
And actually I did a Michigan Northwestern game when Frank was out with a bad back. He had bad back surgery. So we did. I got that tape, gave it to him, and then in the middle of March, they called me back and said, "Hey, we think you can do it. So would you mind sliding over?" And I said, "No." As a matter of fact, to me, it's a new challenge. To me, it's kind of a different thing. Gets me out of my comfort zone. But for me, I like that. And I said, "Yeah, I'll be glad to." And then from then on, it became a situation of finding that color guy, and I'm telling you right now, that didn't happen until late because Dan was not in the mix because of back surgery that he had late in January, and he wasn't sure physically he was going to be able to do it. And his recovery and rehab has gone very, very well, and he thought, by August he's going to be ready, and he wanted to do it. He wanted to be involved in Michigan broadcast, as you read the newspapers, that he's been kind of jealous of me all these years that he hasn't, been around Ann Arbor and been around Michigan football. He's been busy doing pro games, and so he wanted to come back home. And with the recovery and the rehab, he said, I think I can do this. And Dave Brandon stayed after him too. I mean, Dave was, as Dan I think was quoted as saying at one point, he was tenacious. And finally, about a week before the decision was made, Dan said, "Okay, let's talk seriously," and that was it.
Gotcha. We're talking to Jim Brandstatter this morning, Michigan's play-by-play man here on the Michigan Insider on Sports Talk 1050 WTKA, online at WTKA.com.
So, Jim, we don't want to have, sell yourself short that you did the game for Frank in 2003 when he missed the game at Northwestern, but you did a game on TV, if my stories are correct, back in, 1980? You had to do a last-minute film for TV?
That's true. Yeah, I've done Michigan football since '79. Back in the days of what's called on TV, I don't know whether
I
you
remember
guys are too
that.
young to remember that.
I remember that.
Do you really?
Yes, we had one of those
Giving
on
away
boxes.
your age.
Yeah, we had one of those on boxes. Now I was 2 or 3, but
well, yeah, they had on TV, and it was a local kind of a ESPN thing. They used to show movies between 8 and midnight on Monday through Fridays. Saturday nights they were looking for local programming, some kind of local stuff. So they did Michigan football on a tape delay on television. They did the whole game just like a television broadcast and aired it at midnight. And the first year I did it with Larry Osterman. Next year I did it with Larry Adderley. And Larry Adderley against Notre Dame came up with terrible laryngitis. And so myself and guess who did color? Steve Grody. We grabbed Grody out of the crowd, and he came up and he did the color analyst job in a Notre Dame-Michigan game in 1980.
Outstanding stuff. And hey,
How about that?
I got to give it to some of our. We got Dr. Sapp was the one that
yeah.
I'm
where he found that, man. Some of these guys, and where did they get this stuff? I don't even have that.
Right. So Brandy, kind of take us into the process. I mean, it's an art form what you guys do. The color job and play-by-play, both are art forms, but they're different. So, I mean, going from one seat to the other, kind of take us through how that's going to go in the transition and that type of deal.
Here's the way I looked at it. I've always felt that the color guy answers the questions why and how in a football game. The play-by-play guy answers the questions who, what, when, and where. And that's kind of the division, I think, of the two guys. Because the play-by-play guy he's more technical. Because he's got to give you who carried the ball, whether it was a pass, whether it was a run, what yard line it's on, how many yards they gained, how many yards they have to go to get a first down, time on the clock, and score. All of those things have to be kind of put in to a play to keep the listener kind of aware in his mind's eye of what's going on in the game. And then the color guy jumps in and does the why and how. Great block by so-and-so allowed somebody to get here. If he, long pass, he throws it over the top. He had to throw it that deep because his guy had to run under it. If he throws it short, it's probably intercepted. Those are the things, the whys and the hows. So that's how the division goes. And for me, I don't want to say it's a bookkeeping thing as much, but it's going to be more technical. There's more nuts and bolts kinds of things at play-by-play. But you still have to maintain, and this is the beauty of the job, you still have to maintain that entertainment factor, that enthusiasm, that energy, while taking care of all of the the facts, the technical things that you have to do as a play-by-play guy. It's a fine line to walk because you got to get a lot of information out, and yet you have to have that information out in a fun and entertaining and informative way. So I'm really looking forward to it.
I kind of see that as the bridge, which you just talked about, the entertainment factor, as the technical aspects of the booth come together. The entertainment that's born of the passion that you talked about, of the chemistry that obviously you and Dan have, the stories that you guys have. I feel like that entertainment factor can really be the bridge.
I agree, and here's the interesting thing about broadcasting football games. And Frank and I have done this for years, and Dan Miller and I with the Lions. We can do technically a very solid game, and you know what the people will remember? A disagreement or an argument about somebody's haircut. I mean, that's what they go. You guys were hilarious when you were talking about so and so. I thought I know. I almost drove off the road, and it's like it has nothing to do with the game or the technical aspect of the game. It has to do with that entertainment part, or that relationship part. Frank and I, one of the most famous calls that Frank and I have had in all of our years of broadcasting was the Rodgers and Hammerstein call. I'm sure everybody knows about that. And that had nothing to do with football. It was about, Frank making a comment about how when Mike Hammerstein and Nate Rodgers sacked a guy from Northwestern, and he broke himself up talking about what a great melodious tune that was from Rodgers and Hammerstein. He thought that was hilarious. And he started to laugh. And he couldn't stop. And people remember that call probably more than maybe the Rose Bowl we did when Michigan won the national championship. So the entertainment factor, as you put it, is really, really very important. You have to, I think, have the listener not only enjoy the game, be informed about the game, see the game in their mind's eye, especially on radio, but you also have to entertain them. You also have to make sure that they are enjoying themselves almost as much as you are, so that they'll come back again.
We're talking to Jim Brandstatter this morning here on the Michigan Insider on Sports Talk 1050 WTKA, online at WTKA.com. I think also unique to the appeal specifically this year, particularly this year, Brandy, is you got two offensive linemen in the booth in a year where there is uncertainty on the offensive line and their need for a great deal of explanation.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, we're both guys that believe that it begins and ends up front. And I know Brady Hoke's the same kind of guy. So you're going to get Dan and I that are, believe me, Dan said he has to make an adjustment because there's a difference between somebody making $6 and $7 million, playing the game, and a 19-year-old kid. We're not going to be critical and we're not going to be nasty. But if something doesn't go right, you can't gloss it over. Mm-hmm. You got to talk about it. And that offensive line a year ago, their protection schemes and inability to run the football and all the things that, they created negative plays a lot. You can't ignore that stuff. And as a broadcaster, you've got to say, this is what happened. If you don't, your credibility's gone. And I'm sure Dan and I have been in the business long enough to know that, we're gonna be even-handed and fair with a Michigan bias, because both of us are Michigan guys, and we're going to have a Michigan bias. I mean, that's the way it's going to be, because we're broadcasting games for Michigan football fans, but we're also going to be fairly even-handed in regards to, things that happen on the field. We want Michigan to win. I don't think there's any question there, but we're also going to be accurate.
Gotcha. Good stuff. Brandy, I guess one of the last things about Michigan, anyway, I do have one Lions question I want to throw at you, is leading up to that first broadcast, do you guys, is there any kind of combo work you do, any kind of rough draft, if you will, that you go through in preparation?
The rough draft. That may be a good term for what we do, a rough draft. I don't know, actually. Dan, this thing just happened like a week ago. And Dan and I are in the process of finding what his schedule is going to be like when he comes up, because he spends most of the summer in Michigan, and he's also in the middle of recovery from a very extensive back surgery. So we haven't really sat down and put anything like that together, but I suspect that sometime in the summer we will spend some time over at the football office, and we will reintroduce Dan to all the football coaches, kind of get to know everybody, and then in the fall we'll probably come up to a scrimmage or two and sit down next to each other in the stadium and just start talking and try to make it a little bit of a mock broadcast, and from there we go.
Gotcha. All right. So, Brandy, you are a guy who is very attuned to what's going on with the Lions as well, and every headline right now is about Ndamukong Suh and the voluntary workouts, voluntary mini camps that he either has missed already or looks like he will miss going forward. Is that a big deal, whether or not he's there?
To me, it's not. Ndamukong Suh can play the game, okay? and we know he's as good a defensive tackle as there is in the league. He's, 3 or 4 years or 4 years in a row, he's been a Pro Bowler. So it's not like he needs to work very much. You know that he comes into camp every year in shape. He has a history and a background of it. So to me, it's not that vital or important. If he were a rookie or a guy like a Nick Fairley, who needs to, I think, in my judgment, show something, improve something, especially to a new coaching staff. It'd concern me a bit. But Ndamukong's in the middle of a negotiation for a contract. This is the business part of the game, and he's just going to say, "Look, I'm not going to come into this voluntary deal." Probably talked to Coach Caldwell about it, and said, given what's going on, I've been advised to such and such, and don't worry about me. I'll be in shape. Everything's going to be cool. So, from my perspective, I don't think it's that much in the whole scheme of things. That being said, I would love to see them sign him to a long-term contract. They've done it with Stafford, and they've done it with Calvin, and he's the third part of that trio that the Lions have that's drafted homegrown talent, and I'd like to see him get in the books and on the roster now for an extended period of time. But that being said, I don't think that him missing this voluntary workout is a huge thing, and that we should all gnash our teeth and wring our hands about it.
Yeah, I hear it. Well, it's certainly, I thought it was just a local deal. You look at ESPN and Sports Illustrated, it's everywhere now. It seems to be making a big deal out of it.
Any more things like this, get blown out of control, I think. And it's like they're looking for something to write. And if everything's quiet, what's the sand hill that's out there? Oh, it's Ndamukong Suh not coming to camp. Let's make that a mountain. And I think that's what they've done.
Gotcha. Well, certainly, Jim, it has been great to have you on. It was a celebratory mood last week, and I don't think it's ended about the booth that's going to be in play for Michigan football starting this fall. So congratulations, and we look forward to hearing you and Dan on the air.
Thanks, Sam. I appreciate it, and we look forward to doing it. I'm just excited as I can be. I think it's going to be great fun.
All right. Thanks a lot, Jim. Appreciate your time. That was Jim Brandstatter. Part of the new duo in the booth for the Maize and Blue, Jim Brandstatter and Dan Deerdorf. And
it's going to be great, Sam.
Again, the technical pieces to the puzzle that they're going to try to put in place. And he said, hey, it's going to be a process. You're going to hear a lot of great stories along the way.
That's what's going to make the booth great. And that's what makes a great radio booth in any sport is at the end of the day, you need to be able to tell stories in addition to painting the picture of what you're seeing out there. They'll paint a fine picture of what we see, and the stories are going to be off the charts.
8:24 on a Tuesday. We got to get to a break. We'll be back on the other side here on the Michigan Insider on Sports Talk 1050 WTKA, the official voice of University of Michigan.